Welcome to the 2-month review. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm here with Brian Wood. And you're all the right things.
I don't know what's so
I don't know what's happening.
Hi, Chad. This is Brian. It's very good to be here.
This is our weekly podcast where we take a book, read it bit by bit, section by section, break it down, have fun, blah, 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 blah. This season, we're doing the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, and we were supposed to read sections 174 through 221, or pages 190 through 237 in the U.S. edition for today, and I didn't do that. So, hey, Brian, hey, Anastasia, how are you guys doing?
Fuck you, Chad.
Doing well.
I don't think I like this book. We'll get there.
Okay.
So, Brian, you were in a car accident. I haven't seen you guys forever.
It was a car intentional.
It was a car intentional. You were in a car intentional?
No. Okay, let's step back. Anastasia, tell us a little bit about yourself, since you're our esteemed special guest today.
Oh,
why should we listen to anything you have to say about a book?
Because I'm the only one who read it today.
Bonus points.
I also am the poetry editor at Open Letter, and I study poetry. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Rochester.
Okay, we're going to get into the poetry part of this in a second, but why don't you make an impassioned plea for people to send us their poetry books?
Yeah, send us your poetry books.
You guys are watching? You've seen this, right?
I just got my copy yesterday, because if you guys haven't, you should totally pick up Decals, because it's beautiful and it's got these gorgeous images in there, and the pages are nice and weighty. They're beautiful. It just feels nice to touch them. Yeah.
Do it on the front, like flashing a woman on the front cover.
No way. Wait, what? Hold on. Now I'm looking at my copy.
No one really paid attention to that, and then it's like, no, that's
for folks.
Oh,
like
he's totally flashing a lady, but he's got like a cape. Have you noticed that? It's like a cape.
That's just it's like a cape, but it's like, let me find their actual picture.
What is this book you guys are looking at that people can't necessarily see?
Right. Oh, right. That were like
excellent audio, guys. Is this the new Open Letter poetry?
This is the newest poetry. Oh yeah, there's the picture.
Cool.
This is the newest release in the poetry series. It just came out. Or no, it's not. It hasn't even come out yet. It's pre-release. Yeah. But it's beautiful.
Is this the first one you edited?
No.
Okay.
The first
so it'll be not as good as the next one that comes out.
Right.
It will be not as good as the next two after this one. Two more. That makes me.
You're right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The next one's fine.
So just a very ignorant question. I'm on the exact opposite spectrum of it. So you guys mostly do fiction, some literary nonfiction or narrative nonfiction, whatever you want to call it, and you do a little, like, you dip your toe into poetry, right?
We do one book a year.
Okay, out of what, 10?
Out of 10, yeah.
Okay, and so mine's going to be the opposite. It's they like basically do poetry and then do like one story collection a year.
By you mean who's publishing you? Boa Editions. Yeah.
Yes. So is there a benefit or a drawback from having a house that does a little bit of something else, but mostly does one other thing? That's probably the worst way to ask that question, but whatever.
Yeah, that's the question. But there's a benefit to having range in your list to some degree, but being within a book, I think. We go through this in my class sometimes, where it's like, if you're going to start a press, would you want it to be super specific and focused on like YA books from Germany, or is that just redundant at some point and you need like more things? And I think having fiction or having poetry adds something to your list, and the better you are at it, at that other thing, the better off like everything seems to run for your press. But it's mostly about getting like bookstores to pay attention and people to pay attention. That's not just like, oh, they do crazy novels. They do long Hugo Frazan novels. It's like, no. They also do this, and therefore, like, anything else is possible in between.
Yeah, because I mean, open letter is obviously niche because it's only translated. Like that's your guys' wheelhouse, and so the poetry is only translated. Like it crosses over nice. And I guess with Boa, I guess it makes sense because they only do story collections. They don't do anything other than that, basically, as far as fiction's concerned. So what about like
novels?
Yeah. What about New Directions?
They do everything. So this Girondo book that I'm showing people who are watching us on YouTube or watching it not live, but even like afterwards, if you're listening to the podcast, Decals by Oliverio Girondo. Mispronounced name. People playing bingo at home. You have a lot of squares to check off right now. I'll give you that I am hungover. This book, there's another pamphlet, or there's a pamphlet from New Directions translated by Heather Cleary of some of the poems from here, from the first part of it. So New Directions does poetry, they do novels, they do short stories, they do translated stuff, not translated stuff. They're like big enough to be able to do anything at this point. And they're 80 years old and have established themselves as like the premier, independent press.
Isn't that kind of what the editor was when we talked to the editor? Was it, I'm sorry, forget his name, was it Declan?
Yeah. Yep.
Didn't he mention something like they're interested in like serious works of literature that are going to be worthwhile 30, 40, 50, 60, like something that may not be popular now but has staying power. Like they're interested in like transformative literature maybe, or I don't know what.
It's really funny, like we
only want serious literature. Or I don't know.
But like I feel like all of us use that same phrase of being like, we're doing books that are like, to be read 100 years from now. And it's really just code for like probably won't sell. Like, it's unpopular today, but maybe 100 years from now, people I'll be dead. Well, who cares? Popular then.
So Anastasia, as far as like are you helping with selecting the poetry manuscripts that you guys want to publish?
I am selecting the poetry manuscripts.
You are selecting them. Okay. So what then do you look for as far as what do you want to take or not take? Is there like a checklist that you have, like your handy dandy spreadsheet?
Well, funny that you asked that, Brian, because I was talking to our marketing person yesterday about that question. So I'm looking for some languages that we haven't seen before. It'd be really nice to see a few languages that aren't Spanish.
Hey, you.
I know you can. Go ahead.
I remember when
Granta read the poems anyway.
When Granta did their best Spanish language issue, it was like 98% was like Spain and Argentina, because that's the only places where Spanish literature comes from, right?
There are no other books, no language. What?
I mean, not really.
So other languages.
Looking for other languages. We're looking for some younger writers, maybe some writers who are still alive. That would be really great to see some younger poets who are still writing.
I like how this is all like coded. Like the person who did edit the poetry series is not listening to this podcast, but like you're basically throwing them under the bus.
No, I'm not. Because I think this book, Decals is beautiful, and I think it's amazing that it's actually really interested in that word image connection, which I think is really fascinating and really beautiful and does a lot, especially in a translated context. So I would be looking for something that's kind of pushing those boundaries, thinking about translation across media, not just across languages. That's very interesting to me. So I'm also looking for things that make us think about the poetry that's happening, right? We're translating into English. So what are the questions that we're asking in English language poetry right now? It's a lot about what is the power of the line? We're really interested in like the fact that the line isn't just like, oh, I felt like hitting enter here, right? Like there's another thing, there's got to be something else that's kind of happening and informing that line break. And if you're not taking advantage of the line, like If I Was a Suicide Bomber, which is basically prose poems, why aren't you taking advantage of it? Because that book does a really beautiful job of really making us think about, oh, the line is actually like really playing with the length of the sentence. And if that sentence is so long, how does that stretch across multiple poems over the course of a book?
So we got a submission a couple days ago that was emailed to us that just said it's the title of the Word doc is 2018 poetry. And whoever sent this to me, like, you know what? If you're listening to this and you don't want me to make fun of you, please don't send me your poetry. Let me read you the first few lines. You tell me if this is good or bad. You can stop when you realize it's good or bad.
I didn't realize we were going to do a poetry workshop. Well, I'm probably not qualified to workshop poetry.
No, you are. Purple shadows through misty skies, an autumn moon hiding in disguise. Blowing through the twilight's gloom, purple shadows, yes, they loom. I stare for hours, wondering why you're not here to see me cry. I don't want to stop and go on. The next thing, one sunny days where
I don't know, Chad. This is at the top of my selection right now. This is my favorite one I've seen.
You guys are mean. You guys are mean. Jeez, come on.
We're literally reading.
There's nothing wrong with it other than there's some areas for opportunity. So yeah, I'm not saying false. I'm just saying some areas where things could be improved, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the whole thing.
Maybe you're not reading it very good. How about that? It was a bad reading.
You put your poetry voice on.
So then going back to poetry, because I know this is...
I was actually going to say about... Are you going to ask about Book of Disquiet as a book of poetry, Brian? Is that where you were going to go?
Yeah, that's where I was going to... That was going to be my segue. Are you considering this poetry as you're reading it, or...
I'm curious what you guys thought of it. So we had to read 50 pages, and at first I started reading it the way I read poems, which is like read the thing that's outlined as a poem, pause, stare, read again. Pause,
that's the way that you read poems is you pause and stare.
You have to get your stare going, otherwise you're not reading poems. You're doing it wrong.
Maybe roll your own cigarette because one is cheaper and it's cooler.
Well, you have to also cigarette. Right. Well, because that helps you get your like existentialist angst really going. That action of rolling helps you roll into existentialism. Yeah. Maybe a little bit of nihilism, which also might be appropriate.
That's for sure.
So I was really torn because I kept stopping to read it like a poem, but then like, damn, you're never going to get anywhere if you keep reading it that way. So how do you guys read it?
Second phase feels like very much like prose to me.
My hot take that people get really pissed about is I don't think this is good because I don't think that because of the editing process, and I know we talked to the editor and has his reasons for including everything, but this book is to me hard to read in the sense that like you're saying you're reading it like poems or you try to. But my problem with it is that if you try and read it at all, there's a lot of pieces that would have been cut out. And I feel like a lot of this would have just been edited out. And so I feel like I'm reading drafts of things and it's driving me insane. Like I don't think I like this book. And it's on me. Like this is like a famous book that people will be like, you're a fucking moron. Like don't say, but I don't know. I just have a hard time. And I can't read it I can't read it like poetry. I can't read it like prose. There's just no way. I'm having a hard time with it now. I like certain things that I don't like a lot of it.
What about you, Brian? What's your reading experience been
like? Let's see. Hold on one second. Yes?
I can segue for you.
Okay.
I'm in Seattle. It's like 7 a.m. here to you guys. So like,
sorry, my daughter was telling me she's going to go put on some pants. So I was like, okay, I would agree. Putting on pants is a good idea.
This hotel I'm staying in, the Belltown Inn, their slogan is "Walk to everything."
There you go.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, just walk to everything.
That's such like, all right, brief, we'll go in the weeds for just a second. You sent me that podcast of like everybody hating Wells Towers reading at, was it Tin House or something like that, fiction camp? Mm-hmm. And I love the ladies start like, we were hanging out in Portland and we were eating cherries and they were delicious. And it was like, Seattle, just walk to everything. It's like the perfect Pacific Northwest. Yeah, there was a mention in the editor's note,
crazy
that this is from Pessoa himself, I think. Pessoa clearly felt that Soares was a more suitable author and even drew up a plan of what to do with all those fragments. The organization of the book should be based on as rigorous a selection as possible of the various existing texts, adapting any older ones that are untrue to the psychology of Bernardo Soares. Apart from that, there needs to be a general revision of style without it losing the personal tone or the drifting, disconnected logic that characterizes it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so like even he's saying like, yeah, you know, this has got to be put together, and we'll think about the tone and the voice. And like here, we just get everything. Like it was just
everything.
There's absolutely everything, even maybe the discarded bits.
Yep.
You know, that would normally be tossed out, and so I feel like it does make it a little bit cumbersome because you know sometimes it's like, gosh, this goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, exactly. Like I appreciate the sort of the academic like intention behind this book of like having everything there so that people can access all of it and like can make what they want to make out of it.
Oh, this is like this is like mainline heroin if you're a Pessoa academic, I think. Like this would be
I think
amazing.
this is like the good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I will you know, give you my ending right here is that on 210 or section 210, page 222 in our edition, my favorite line of this whole section is "I hate reading." That's that. But Anastasia, have you heard of Pessoa before now?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
What do you mean? Yeah. Of course. Yeah, of course.
I study fucking poems. I study 20th century modernist poems. I would be doing something wrong if I hadn't. It's all modernist dudes.
You and your academia is making me feel unsmart. I don't like it.
Name a fiction writer. Guarantee I haven't read it.
I have never heard of Pessoa until now. No, I felt totally dumb because like everybody's like, oh yeah, Pessoa is the best.
People in Wegmans tell you Pessoa is the best. You
somebody yells at me,
stop you and tell you.
I was buying some 9-volt batteries for the smoke alarm because I'm a responsible adult now, and someone just yells Pessoa. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But had you read him before? So you just knew of him as an existent poet.
I had read a couple. I'll be honest. I hadn't read very much. I had read excerpts from Book of Disquiet, and that's about it. And it was while I was studying for my exams in a pretty caffeinated, panic-filled haze. So I remembered absolutely none of it.
That's like me and 90% of the canon. Yeah, I read 90% of the canon in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's kind of how that worked.
Yeah.
You know what's good? Cocaine.
Yeah. So, and I'd also read a little bit of it when I went to Lisbon a few years ago because I was like, oh, I'm in Lisbon. I should like read some more Pessoa and like remind myself. And
God, you're the worst. Like,
I am. I'm the absolute worst.
When I was in Lisbon, I had to read some Pessoa, and it's like, well, when I was in Sandusky, Ohio, I got to read.
You got to read like Zika virus.
I read Sherwood Anderson.
Yeah, Winesburg, Ohio. That's just great.
I wrote a thing once for about Sandusky, Ohio for Deadspin, the blog that's basically about sports or whatever. If anyone, it's not under my name. Like I hid it because I was like, it's really.
Oh, a heteronym. So you also used a heteronym.
Heteronym is named Anonymous. But if you Google "help this man find the worst karaoke song ever," there's a Sandusky, Ohio on Deadspin's website. It's Sandusky, Ohio plus family reunion, so it's all the good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know how I like karaoke.
Yes, I do actually. I do know that. Yeah. But actually, it's interesting that we ended up at Winesburg, Ohio, because of the different personas that are taken up in each of those chapters and each of those short stories. Yeah. There is an interesting thing reading this. Like, I know the whole second half is supposed to be Soares or Soares or however you're supposed to say that. Sorry, my Portuguese is non-existent.
That's a block bingo card.
But I actually had this experience reading this where I wonder if it's because of the editing or whatever. but it only felt like sometimes it was Sorish, and sometimes it kind of, you could kind of feel like there were other personalities or another kind of voice that was intruding. And I thought that was kind of part of what made it kind of complicated to read and kind of interesting to read.
Yeah.
Especially once you get to that part, because we get that part where he's talking about like the self observing the self as an other, and whoa, like wow, wowzers. So yeah. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to deal with that precisely, but it was an interesting thing to have to deal with.
So here's a question, I guess, for both of you. But about that I think about when I was trying to read this is like, there's a way. Okay, so when you're reading like a novel, there's a certain system that you read that explain that you know how to approach a novel. It's going to be a narrative. There's going to be some things that happen within it, but there's like a story of sorts, and you learn kind of how to do it as you go along. And when you like to put this into another realm, like when you're listening to music or whatever, there's different ways that albums create a sense of narrative within themselves. Where you're like different tracks have their own sort of vibe. They're doing something specific that like leads into like a general thing. And when you're reading poetry, it's frequently, for me, there's not one sort of like overall narrative. It's different in some ways, and that's fine, and that's great. This book seems to want to do both of those. Like, how do you read this? Because it's like, on one level, I'm like, well, it's kind of a character study of like who Bernardo Soares is, and there's consistencies of him like working at the office and like on that road, whatever the fuck road it is, and like, you know, paying attention to like dumb, boring, menial tasks. So there's that consistency of character in that sense, and the rest of it seems to be like his thoughts generally, and that he's writing down, like, keeping references like this book is bad, and like, or he's like, you know, the book that I'm trying to write, I don't know why I do this. I'm not a genius. I'm not a good writer. Blah blah blah, and that's fine, but it doesn't fit. Like the other pieces don't fit together to the point where like that's what I think causes me like consternation. And it's like dumb because I know that what this is. I get it. I like the concept of it just fine, but I don't know that I like being in this world where like sometimes the pieces mean something and sometimes they're just like feel like they could have just been left out.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I'm going to go back a couple, just like, I love that question that you just asked, the genre convention question, because that's one of the interesting things for all of you translators who are sending in your poetry manuscripts to be listening in at home. When you're talking about the three people who might be listening. I
mean, I was going to say, you should just plug your email address or where they should send them.
Yeah. Oh, anastasia.nicolas@gmail.com. You can send those questions, or you can just use Submittable. It's so much better. Do that. Don't use my email. But when I was going to go back to your point, edit that out. I don't know what you're like telling me to do so many different things. I have a thing I'm trying to say, Chad. Shut up.
No.
I'm totally going to write some fake poems with a fake name and start emailing you random poems now.
Purple.
Okay, I'm going back to your point about, yes, when you read novels, you're looking for like the narrative arc, some sort of character development. The interesting thing when you're reading a collection of poems is sometimes you're reading like isolated poems and you just have to like live in these isolated little chunks. But one of the fun things that happens when a book of poetry is really cohesive is you get these sort of concepts that kind of like rhyme or like show up again, right? And then you get this kind of interesting networking effect. And that's something that like really gifted poets, when they're putting together the collections, will really think about. And I did get some of that here, which I think is part of why I tried to start reading it as poems, because like that, the way that somnambulance and like sleepwalking shows up again and again and kind of gets revised, and like the different ways we think about sleeping, that keeps showing up, and that kind of like that reiterative concept. And obviously that happens in novels too, but that's often a really good structuring mechanism for a collection of poems, is when like a concept gets reinterpreted and reimagined across many different poetic contexts. And usually part of what kind of helps you reshape them is changing the way that a poem is presented. But in this case, since they're all kind of prosy, it doesn't quite do that. So instead, that's usually changed like, oh, this time I'm walking down the street and I'm sleeping. This time I'm sleeping and like reading the ledger. Yeah. In that sort of sense, that sort of thing is part of what gave me this kind of networking feel, that I was supposed to be kind of reading for that connection rather than reading across. So like normally when I would read a book of poems, the way I would do that is like my books of poems will have little like marks in the corners, like, oh, look, I got that like sleepwalking thing again. Better go back to page, what is that? 5 pages back where the last time I saw that was, and like kind of read across that way.
Right.
But this is hard, just like you're saying, because you want to do that, but there's also a very clear linear, like kind of chronological movement through the pages that really disrupts that urge to like disrupt that like kind of chronology and go back. That's the big thing about poetry, right? Is going back to the beginning, reading through, back to the beginning, or back to the other point, reading through again.
And that's kind of the big difference between this version, which is just chronological as he wrote, like things that sort of relate to the Book of Disquiet. Like they're not even like, it's not even clear that all the pieces were supposed to be in this one book. But other version that's like very well known is the Penguin Classics version that Richard Zenith translated, and that one's organized by theme. So there's like sections. It's close to what you're talking about, where you read it like as like, here are like 50 things on dreams or whatever, and they're in like one area, rather than rather than spreading them out entirely. I think a lot of them are like more condensed into a sequence. I mean, this book is crazy because like literally, like I asked someone last night who works at a bookstore here, I was like, have you read this? Are you a fan? And they're like, in theory, yes, but like every time I pick up a different version of it, it's different. Like there's different opening line, like it's a different everything. And like something about that is like, it's appealing, I think, is like a kind of idea of like what literature can do, but also it is sort of daunting to the point where like, I don't know what this is anymore. Like, and I know that Declan was like, well, it's just like a great work of literature, and I get that, but on some level, like there is like, this is one of those points where like I was so excited last time that we did it when it was just you and me, Brian, and we were like got to Bernardo Soares, and it was like, this is so much smarter and a better voice than Vicente Guedes, whose voice kind of sucks in the end, and it's just like emo-y and nihilistic. And like this second half of the book is like so much more interesting, and then trying to read these 50 pages is like, maybe. Like, God damn it.
The thing that I keep going back to with
dreams.
Bernardo Soares was it was written in the preface part on page X 10. I don't know, page -10 or whatever it is. But just the idea that like he used Soares for the second phase, and the voice was a simple mutilation of my personality. It's me minus reason and affectivity. And so I kind of took that with like when you're talking about sleeping or sleepwalking, or I kept saying like it's kind of stripping away the finery of people and trying to get back to what's something more primal, or you know, and it ends up being meaningless. So it talks about consciousness or being conscious of your conscious. So I kept trying to, like, as I'm reading this, I just kept thinking back of like, this is Pessoa like stripped down to be very raw, like raw, the things you're not maybe allowed to say or think, like those lines about pederasts or, you know, whatever. It's, yeah, I think it's like trying to get back into a center part of Pessoa's brain. He uses maybe Soares to do that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Sorry, Chad, I'm going to jump in. Because when he gets to because what you're talking about, Brian, I know what you're talking about. And I found that really compelling in the intro too. But when I got to page 229 in section 217, when he's talking about confession and autobiography, right? This is like the second sentence. Through these deliberately unconnected impressions, I am the indifferent narrator of my autobiography without events, of my history without a life. These are my capital C confessions.
Yeah.
And if I say nothing in them, it's because I have nothing to say. And that I thought was really interesting, because then that idea of like rawness, or like I have something like special inside, is totally like cut out from beneath, like cut off at the knees. And that was actually one of the things I found very compelling. One of the things I found the most compelling about this, because like I study modernism, so I read a lot about like nihilistic dudes who think what they have to say is really important.
Yep.
And one of the things, and like last week I was teaching Jules Laforgue, who's like a particularly like salient example of this. Like T.S. Eliot learns all of his bullshit from that. So like getting here, it was actually interesting because I did appreciate that like there was quite a bit of consciousness, self-consciousness and awareness that like, wait a minute, what I actually have to say, like, it's like this very funny move where like, what I'm actually saying might actually not be like all that meaningful and might not actually be like all that self-important. There might not actually be anything raw here. And in actually saying that, he actually like reclaims some of that douchery, because he's kind of saying like, look, I'm so important that I recognize what I'm saying is meaningless, but listen to me because what I'm saying is meaningless. Like, I have to give him credit. I have to give him mad props, because that's pretty good. That's pretty clever. But it does make it a little bit more appealing because of it.
The men's rights movements. I'm here to reclaim my douchery.
Right.
I caught that again.
Right.
Section 176 at the bottom of it. There's in our version, it's on page 191. It says, like the useless corpse of the average man being lowered into the common ground, the equally useless corpse of my prose, written while I wait, is lowered into a general oblivion. Like it goes back to that, right? Like it's meaningless, but here you are writing it, telling me that it's meaningless. And there's kind of like that weird tautology of the thought of like, well, obviously you think it's worth something, otherwise you wouldn't have saved this trunk full of everything you ever wrote.
Exactly.
And he mentions that too again with that one poet that's obscure to me. Maybe he's made up. Senor Verde, I think it was. Who was a poet that only became famous after he died, and is only appreciated long after he's dead. Was that the case with Pessoa as well?
Yeah, nothing was published until 80s. So
related to what you're saying,
Yeah, exactly. Related to what you're saying on section 189 or page 201 in our edition, there's a whole ending bit where he's talking about like, well, it begins with like, I asked for so little from life, and life denied me even that. And the ending is like, it's like, I observed rather unlovely writing. The cheap cigarette in my left hand as it rests on the old bladder. Here I am in this fourth floor room, demanding answers from life, pronouncing on what other souls feel, writing prose as if I were a real genius, a famous writer, me, here, like, yes.
I just gave that one a ha in my, yeah.
Yeah, it is. That kind of ties into what you're saying about like the undercutting of the poet of genius,
right?
Which is refreshing because dude,
exactly.
suck, and like dudes that are poets who think that they're geniuses suck twice as hard,
maybe 3 or 4 times as hard. My God, because they created the entire 20th century poetry nightmare that we've had to like deal with,
and still live within it.
Yeah, that we're still recovering from. We're still like very slowly crawling out of that hellhole. So yeah, so like I gotta tell you, I like actually really found some of it kind of refreshing in that way, and I was actually kind of impressed that this was being written when I was reading
the first time. It's kind of like that.
It's kind of like what?
Reading Milk and Honey for the first time.
Well, think about what.
Moving on.
Think about like what a prophet is in some way. So this is written in 1929. This section on 176. It's page 190 in our edition.
Okay.
Talking about just this quote here. Apply this to today's politics. You have to grab it while you can. So that could be Trump or Kevin Spacey or Harvey Weinstein right there, right? And then in the very next section, 177, most if not all men live wretched lives. So like this guy he's all over it. He was a forward thinker, that's for sure.
Deny your wife, but not your mother, your father, or your brother.
And then a couple sections later, 181, everyone has a boss, always ready with some inappropriate joke.
I love it. That's the parts I like in here is like the parts where it's sort of funny.
Yeah.
Where is it? So after he criticizes romanticism, it's on page 209, section 195. Some are funny, others are only funny, others do not yet exist. And then I came, I saw, and unlike them, I conquered. Because my victory consisted in seeing. I saw that those inferior beings were no different from any other group of inferior beings.
Wow, a play on Julius Caesar. That's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that tattooed on my back. No, but the funny thing is like that dumb little line, like everyone has a boss, always ready with inappropriate joke. Like I had to stop for a moment and think. Yeah, I'll be quiet in just a moment. Okay, hold on. I'm interrupting my daughter's program. Sorry, but So like, if I thought maybe that was just something of like today's times with, with the United States introducing women into workplace later than most industrialized nations, like men being inappropriate around women. But what is it with people of power having this need and want to make inappropriate jokes? Like it started making me wonder, like, it seems like something that's just, maybe it was always a part of time, and I just think today's times are special. But like, does it have to do something with power and trying to relate to common people that, quote, don't have power? Or like, where does this need for inappropriate jokes come from within the work? Because every job I've ever had, my bosses have always been like just sleazy, like and there's Chad with his hand up. Captain Inappropriate Joke. Is it for, I wonder, like, is that for team building, you think? Or
yeah, that's actually, that might be closer to it, is like, if you have an other, if you can make an other out of your group through jokes, which is what usually jokes are, is like othering someone else, that then you have a better team.
You're relatable.
Yeah,
right?
No, you make everyone complicit. It's sort of like, this is going to be a deep dive into like inappropriate joke telling, which might not be true, but it's like that. There's a TV show called The Push that was on Netflix. It was a special by some guy who's like great at manipulating people into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And part of the trick to getting people with behavioral economics.
Oh, this is the guy that made British people push somebody off a building.
Yeah, they people push someone off a building to kill them, to like cover something up, and 75% of the people just did it. They're just like, fine, and they just shove a dude off the building, like willingly murder someone for this. But part of the deal with that was that if you get people to believe, and this happens in behavioral economics too, and like the theories on how to get people to fall into patterns, is that you get them to do a small thing first. Like something that's small that seems innocuous, and then they'll do a bunch of other stuff. Like once you believe in like a very, 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 it doesn't even have to be that important. So like in that show in Push, or The Push or whatever, like part of the deal was that he got the people that he was his mark, they would like lie that they were like, there's no, for these appetizers, we were supposed to have vegetarian ones, but no vegetarian ones showed up. So let's just like pretend that these are vegetarian and mark them as vegetarian. And so like the people started doing that. And once they did that, they're in. Like that's enough to give
1 hour later, murder.
Like
it all starts with an appetizer.
It all starts with one lie, like one tiny lie.
Sure.
And Cesar Ira's books, the Argentine writer who writes like a ton of like little like 100-page like novellas, essentially, almost all of his books work in the same way. Like they get you on like page 4 or 5 to buy into like one weird conceit, and then after that it's all crazy. So there's a book called Ghosts, in which like the ghosts are introduced later on, but by the time you've gotten there, you've believed in so many other little minor things that aren't realistic that the ghosts are like, yeah, got it, totally fine. And The Literary Conference is another book of his where like it has this setup at the very beginning of like this really elaborate like treasure hunt that involves an obelisk and a wire and blah blah blah, and the guy finds this money, and then everything that comes after that, it's like crazy, but it's okay because you already believed in this one thing. So I feel like inappropriate jokes that he's getting at are that for the contemporary workplace, is you get people to believe in your one joke, other these people, and then they'll do anything for you because they've already bought into your horribleness as a boss.
A lot of reading is already like that, though, right? Because a lot of really good literature, like really difficult literature, once you get past like the kind of trajectory of like a genre fiction or something that's like very plot driven, part of it is just getting, pardon?
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So when you get to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. Once you leave that, you have to get that buy-in so that you keep going, right? And that's that kind of feels like it's at issue here. Like, where's the buy-in? And he knows it. Like, I actually think that he's very aware that he's not sure what the buy-in is yet. And you even kind of see it in Swarrish when he's like, because the other thing that keeps coming up is him looking at those ledger pages. And those almost act like a kind of like Madeleine, like a Proustian Madeleine type of thing, where like that like triggers him to go off into somewhere. And that seems to be the buy-in, right? It's like, if you can get right back, like Brian was saying, right back to that like workplace and right back to that like ledger page, that's what kind of like is supposed to help you go off and like trust him and like continue that into these like kind of like weird little knot holes that he gets into. I don't know.
It's so related to that. There was I wrote this article on 3% about reading. Shit, what's the person's name? The book is called Geography of Rebels, and it's like a trilogy of like short, very poetic.
That's Glenn Beck.
Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck's Geography of Rebels is about people coming up from Mexico with guns. So this book is written by a Portuguese woman, and it's compared over and over again to Pessoa, and like everyone's like, oh, it's like Pessoa for the 21st century, blah 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 blah. And I couldn't get into it at all. Like I gave up like pretty immediately and tried to write about like the idea of like that those books that so what you're saying, like that's part of it. Like you need to buy in, there needs to be one thing that you can sort of get on board with. But there's also the sense that like when does this, what's the payoff? Like what's the payoff for any of these books? Like is it worthwhile? Like with Finnegan's Wake, we'll use as like an extreme example. Like that book doesn't make sense when you start reading it, like period. And but like if you get into it, I think for me there's enough of a payoff there that it's interesting. But like with some of these books, like I think there is too, because I think there's certain lines that are interesting and unique and like satisfying. But like with a lot of books that are difficult, sometimes it feels like there's that hook to keep you going has to be something that makes it feel like this is worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly.
And so did you read just this section, or did you read the whole book up till now?
I only read the second. I didn't read the first half. I only read the second half. So I read the second half up until this point.
Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. So was there something for you that like would keep you going?
The thing that would keep me going is I wouldn't be able to keep reading it as a fiction work. I would have to go back and read it as a poem, right? That's number one, because the genre convention and those expectations of payoff in the terms of a plot, I'm not getting satisfied there. So I'd have to turn that off. So to go back and read them as poems, I would keep going, because what I'm looking for at this point is I can feel the like construction of this mind kind of like looping, and I'm curious, and it feels like it's getting more focused to me on something that might be worth, like that I'm supposed to kind of uncover through this process. Because there's a lot more clarity by the time he gets to like the self and other, and like this isn't really these confessions are meaningless. That feels like he's getting somewhere to me. So at this point, I'm reading to look to see what that looping ultimately kind of like focuses in on. But I have a feeling because it's unfinished, it's not going to get there. But that is what I'd be reading for.
That makes sense.
Did you guys read Teju Call, Open City?
I read a bunch of it.
But like, like it's like kind of like meandering musings as you're walking the city. And like, I kind of got a feel of like with, because everybody talks about like the descriptions of Lisbon in here are, amazing or whatever. And so it's kind of like somebody's deep ponderings as they're in a city or something, but it goes on for a long time.
I gotta say, why? Like, okay, I'm going to have one moment because I keep seeing that too. Everyone talking about the descriptions of Lisbon being like really awesome. Like, true, they are, but like, really? That like this isn't a travel literature book. Like, why are we reading it for that? That's not what I'm reading this for. If I want to read like the descriptions of Lisbon, I don't know. That's it. I don't know. That just seems like it's kind of missing. Like,
no, but I've heard that hook. I've heard that hook quite a few times. Of like,
me too. I know why.
City, and it's nice, and I'm sure there's going to be some more of it as we go on. But
I think there's a lot more weather to come.
Sure,
many more descriptions of Lisbon weather.
I think I've been enjoying the idea of, I look at it as gamesmanship with the heteronyms, because to me it just kind of seems like this fun game that Pessoa is playing, and inventing them and giving them backstories, and like to me it just kind of like puts a smile on my face when they start referencing each other, and then I go down the wormhole of like, is this real or not real?
Yeah.
Like there was like a line in here that it's just kind of like a throwaway line, but his boss said, or one of his friends says, "You're being exploited, Suarez." And just the idea of like, so the character within the book, the character's being exploited, but isn't Suarez as like a as a heteronym and being exploited by Pessoa at the same time. Like the whole purpose of your existence is just for me to exploit you, to explore things that I want to explore through you and not myself. Like, so like, there's just like multiple meanings of exploitation happening in this story. It made me chuckle when I read the line, like, just quote, "You're being exploited," sort of. So like those little moments of like the gamesmanship and just kind of the wink of the way it's written. I find that interesting to want to push on for that aspect of it.
In some ways, I wish that there was a Pessoa book that was just, I might have said this before, but like that's just like descriptions of his heteronyms and what their perspective was and what they did. Like almost like what's the Bolaño book, Nazi Literature in the Americas, where it's like all these, some of them are real and some of them are fake, like descriptions of bios of authors that some didn't exist and like what they wrote and like what their deal was, that were all like related to fascism in some way or another. Like something like that, I think I would like more than this book. Like this book existing is great, good for it. But it could also, if this book were like 120 pages, I would be happy with that. If it just were those highlights, like the things that we, like there is a lot of the circling back, and there's something to be said for like reading through stuff that like you're maybe not that into and hitting those like nice moments. But if I just had like the highlights of this, the Cliff's notes of like the best sections of it, I'd be good with that. Yeah. But I would really like there to be a book that was just like all of his heteronyms with like their name, what they did, what they wrote, what their beliefs are, some funny story about them. I would read that all day. I love that concept too. And like you only get you get the hints of it in here that's existent within that universe, but it doesn't have that larger payoff.
Right. Well, it's interesting because it kind of feels like it's toggling between that kind of like, because that almost feels like a larger gesture at world building rather than kind of the deep interiority that this is really playing with.
Which is what we all want. We all want Game of Thrones world building. We need
isn't that one of the reasons people love Bolaño so much?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is the world that he's built, like the crazy interconnection of all the different books, characters, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes that's a facile, like sometimes that's a quick distinction that's made between poetry and prose, right? Is that you get that deep interiority, which is like a silly distinction to make because that's like not how that works. But in any event, I'll like trot it out anyway. Like the fact that poetry is that kind of interiority, but like doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the scaffolding to really give you that larger world that we all want. Whereas fiction and prose can kind of give you that larger world, that larger like ability to walk around in a space rather than in a mind, which is complete bullshit. I mean, Vladimir Nabokov throws that out of the way.
No, I think that's a wonderful distinction though. Like what I'm teaching beginning fiction, I always throw out like John Gardner's like very like, you know, he doesn't like experimental literature at all, like meat and potatoes literature, but he always talks about the dream aspect of fiction, where you want the reader to go into a dream state, and the deeper and deeper and deeper you get him into the dream, the more successful you're being as a writer. And I like the idea of poetry is like getting the deepest you can into a literary dream. It's so focused and tight, and same way like where this stays very tight and focused lets you get deeper into a dream. Whereas if you do world build, you're kind of cinematically you're zooming out a little bit so you can get more of a lay of the land, and you know, whereas this is intensely focused and honed in. Right.
And you get more of that like commentary on the heteronyms and the looking. Yeah, totally. Exactly. Yeah. There's something useful. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's the like poetry, dirtbag in me, but I can't like help getting into things like on page 230 at the end of section 217, where he's saying, right, these confessions are my feelings. These confessions of my feelings are my game of patience, which is a card game that he mentions. I don't interpret the cards the way some do to know the future. I don't scrutinize them because, as in games of patience, the cards have no value in themselves. I unwind myself like a length of multicolored yarn, or make cat's cradles out of myself like the ones children weave around stiff fingers and pass from one to the other, taking care that my thumb doesn't miss the vital loop. I turn it over to reveal a different pattern, then I start again. And it's like that kind of like, you just get like lost in this like weird association of like, I'm watching my grandmother play with like these cards, which makes me think of cat's cradle, which makes me think of kids. I'm like down into this like weird wormhole, and then like whoops, now we're out again. Like that kind of like.
Let me try that one more time. Hold on. I unwind myself like a length of multicolored yarn, or makes cat's cradles out of myself, like the ones children's weave around stiff fingers and pass from one to the other, taking care that my thumb doesn't miss the vital loop. I turn it over to reveal a different pattern. Then, so, hey man, I wasn't done.
If you're at NWP at an offsite reading and you just read this, how many pages does it take before people realize that you're just reading Pessoa?
No one realizes it because they've been drinking since 2 p.m. and they have no idea which end is up.
They'll never know.
Go and give yourself a name like Alvaro de Campo or whatever the fuck the things are, and just read this straight as your poetry reading. I wonder if people would even like it. It's like that one. There's like that funny. I don't know if it's still around, but Yahoo used to have like Yahoo Answers or questions where like people could ask things and crowdsource answers. And one point in time, someone posted the first page of Infinite Jest on there and was like, "Here's this book that I wrote. It's sitting in my drawer. I'm not sure if this is good or not. What do you guys think?" And people were like, "This sucks. This is horrible."
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right.
Blah, blah, blah. And it was like what you'd expect. And then I remember at that time, I was like, it would be really funny to like post like Twilight, but like, and see what people say about that. But people would be like, "Hey, it's Twilight."
Yeah, right.
Like,
so this will be the final maybe the final tangent of the episode. I know we're getting low, but one of my favorite Yahoo answers I read was there was a lady that was worried that she was already pregnant and she was worried about having unprotected sex, that the baby inside her could it get pregnant as well. So this was like and the number one answer was yes, but only if the baby inside you is a girl. And then you have to worry about that baby's baby becoming pregnant and creating an infinite loop of pregnancy that will never end, or something like that.
That was awesome.
But yeah, remember that on election day, these people have the same voting rights that you do. So you need to get out there and nullify that person's vote.
Oh my God.
Can my baby get pregnant?
Oh my God.
I would recommend a Mountain Dew lavage. If you could possibly, if you drink a 2-liter Mountain Dew, you're good.
So I have a favorite line. I'll give you guys mine, and then you guys can jump on, because I don't want you guys to steal mine, because I only read like 4 pages of this section. On page 210, section 198, we know that the book we will never write will be bad. Even worse will be the one we put off writing. At least the book that has been written exists. It may not be very good, but it exists. Like the miserable little plant in the lone flower pot belonging to my crippled neighbor.
That sounds like me when I'm writing. Hey, it may suck, but I got words down today.
Hell yeah. I wrote copy. Yeah. I produced copy. That was used to be like when I worked for I still do sort of for Publishers Weekly, but like when we worked at like having to do like at different trade shows, they would have like daily newspapers, and you'd have to get them together. You'd have certain things in place, but then be covering stuff. And it was basically like the best writers were the people who could just churn out copy. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. It was just like, you can make words sort of make sense for 500 of them in a row.
Yeah.
You're awesome. Skill. Like being able to talk on paper. What's your favorite, Ryan?
I really like the line that says, "Where will he take the pork chops and the red wine?" I don't know why, but that just was funny to me. But being that it's an election day, I thought this had a very political slant to it that I liked. It's on section 194, page 207 in our edition. I understand that the reason the pariahs of greatness could triumph was because they triumphed over those nobodies and not over humanity as a whole. So go out there and vote for these people to triumph over us nobodies.
How about you, Anastasia? Do you have a favorite?
I have a couple, but I really liked the way he kept talking about vegetables.
Yeah.
So there's a longer paragraph on page 211, section 200. It's its own little like weird vegetable universe. You could just read that one. Or on page 219, there's another one. And this one's a little bit shorter, so I'll read this one. You should all read 200 at home, though.
Yeah, I've got a line from that I'm going to read.
On 219. And what of my dreams? That shameful flight into myself, the cowardice of mistaking for life, the rubbish tip of a soul that others only visit in their sleep, and that semblance of death through which they snore in that calm state in which, more than anything, they look like highly evolved vegetables.
The people of Walmart.
Ooh, Florida, just all Florida. The 200 one that's my favorite is just that first line. I find it so irritating, the happiness of all those men unaware of their unhappiness.
Right? Right?
That's a goddamn Chad line if ever there was. Look at you guys smiling. Fuck you. You're all unhappy secretly.
I don't know. It ends with, that is why, despite everything, I love them all, my beloved vegetables.
Yep. Oh, man. So anyways, I think that's probably good for this week. Next week, we will be talking about the sections 222 through 273, which are pages in the U.S. edition 238 through 287. And we have a guest lined up for this. So assuming everything goes okay, we have João Reis is an author that we're publishing, the Open Letters publishing next summer. And he's from Portugal. He's a Portuguese writer. He'll be very interesting to hear from too, because he probably grew up in the shadow of Pessoa in a lot of ways. So tune in, listen to that. Tell your friends about the podcast. Be sure to share it as much as you can. Rate us on iTunes, all that kind of stuff. You can also follow us at open_letter or Chad W Post on all social media things. And Brian is at Brian Wood_. And Anastasia, you are at what's your?
I'm not on Twitter.
Smart.
Oh.
I got invited to a different podcast that's way more popular than this one via Twitter yesterday.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Twitter. Sorry, team.
I know.
I'll finish my dissertation. That'll go to Twitter.
One right doesn't, negate 9 million wrongs, So.
Why are men?
Why are Twitter?
Anyways, thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with more Pessoa. And I guess you should go vote.
Yeah, go vote. Bye.